This is Washington Watch. I'm your host, Tony Perkins. So good to have you with us today. The website, tonyperkins.com. Make sure you check it out. All right, Nancy Pelosi on the floor defending this second impeachment of Donald Trump said they, speaking of the rioters that hit the Capitol last week, said they did not appear out of a vacuum. They were sent here by the president with words such as cry to fight like hell, said House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. That's according to the Washington Times. Yeah, things don't happen in a vacuum. And when you look at what's happening on Capitol Hill right now, it's not happening in a vacuum. You look at what is unfolding with the silencing of speech. You look at these social media platforms, not just kicking off the president. That's quite significant. If you think about it, if the president of the United States can be kicked off a social media platform, in fact, all of them, who's safe? Only those who speak things that the proprietors of those platforms want to hear. But here's the question. Is Joe Biden, I think really, I think the country's on fire in terms of the angst, the anger. There's brush fires burning out there all across America. Will Joe Biden drive a fire truck to help extinguish this and unite America, or will he be driving a gasoline truck? I'm afraid it's the latter. Joining me now to talk more about this, Terry Jeffrey, CNSNews editor-in-chief. Terry, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Tony. I appreciate it.
So let's look at the policies in particular as it pertains to Americans having a voice in the shaping of their policies and of their government. Is Joe Biden going to help extinguish the angst that's out there, or is he going to pour gasoline on fire?
He's absolutely going to pour gasoline on the fire. I mean, when it comes to free speech, Joe Biden is vowing to push for a constitutional amendment that will literally prohibit the spending of any private money on political speech in the United States. He wants all political speech funded by the government. In other words, if you're going to run for office, the only way you can run is if the government gives you money to run. If you want to speak about what a politician's doing, have a radio show like you have, Tony, you have to have the money from the government to do it. He literally wants to make it impossible for us to speak on our own, using our own resources to use our First Amendment right to freedom of speech. And how do we know this? Is this some conspiracy theory that somebody's whipping up? No. He's posted it on his campaign website, and he has explained exactly what he wants to do. And he literally says he wants to drive all private money out of American politics, which means that individual Americans won't be able to spend their own money to get their message out, to tell people about what they think about what's going on politically in the United States. That's Joe Biden's position as he's about to become president of the United States.
So would it be a stretch to suggest that if the government is going to be the funder of this and that private funds cannot go into it, that the communications are not going to be conservative, reflecting the values that we talk about here on Washington Watch?
No, they will not be. And, we know how hard it is. Conservatives have had to create their own platforms for getting their messages out. If you're a journalist like I am, you're not going to work for the Washington Post. You're not going to work for the New York Times. They're not going to hire you. That's why CNSNews, where I'm the editor, exists. And that's why we're so glad we're able to get out on the Internet, and quite frankly, why we're able to use social media platforms now like Facebook and Twitter to get our message out. And that's why if those things try to shut down the conservative voice in the media, we have a serious problem, because the establishment voice will not let us have our place.
Well, they saw what happened in 2016 because of that. And so now there is this concerted effort to begin to silence that conservative voice.
There's absolutely no doubt about it. I mean, you have Amazon and Google absolutely shutting down Parler. And as you said, all the social media platforms have banned President Trump. And from what I'm hearing, Twitter is starting to purge some conservatives from their Twitter accounts or censor them. So I think this is a very serious problem. And I think obviously in this mass media age and this electronic age, we need to be able to communicate through these types of platforms. And at this point, unfortunately, it's people like Twitter and Facebook and Google that pretty much have a monopoly on it. And I think that's a big problem.
It is. It is a big problem. We talked about that yesterday. They're the robber barons of the 21st century. But the good news is, when the American people have enough, they can force reform. And I think that's why there's an effort to solidify here the firewall around government, where people cannot speak into government, because the government was a part of the reform of breaking up those monopolies in the early 1900s. But let's talk about this. For this constitutional amendment, the one thing that I find I take solace in is that it is a constitutional amendment, and you're not going to convince a majority of the states in the across this country to support such an idea.
Right. There's no way they're going to. There's no way they're going to ratify it. And but I tell you, it does illustrate something. Why is Joe Biden saying he wants to do this through a constitutional amendment? It's because we've had enough Republican presidents in the last 40 years who have named some good Supreme Court justices, that we've had some excellent opinions by the Supreme Court in recent decades that have protected the freedom of speech of individual Americans. For example, the Citizens United case, which said that corporations have a right to freedom of speech even if they're not a newspaper. It isn't just Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post, who has a First Amendment right to freedom of speech. Every corporation in America does, just like every individual. So, fortunately, it really shows. Why was the Amy Coney Barrett confirmation so important? Why was it so important for President Trump to get those justices on the Supreme Court? Because the Supreme Court has to protect us from unconstitutional actions that the left would take to attack our fundamental rights, like the freedom of speech.
Well, no doubt we got to buckle up. The next couple of years are going to be a bit rocky, I think, as it pertains to those fundamental freedoms. But as I said, America's been here before. We've been challenged. If we look the right place and do the right thing, we can have the right outcome. Terry Jeffrey, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tony.